Welcome to the Embodiment Podcast. This show is for you if you see the body as more than a brain taxi. It's for people interested in coming home to the body as a holistic aspect of who we are and how we live. Episodes contain practical tips, exercises you can take away, and interviews with specialists from around the world. I'm your host for today, Mark Walsh. On the show today, Rod Stryker. So Rod is an extremely experienced yoga teacher, I think about 40 years of experience. He founded an organization called Para Yoga, author of The Four Desires. And this really caught my attention. I think it was a TED talk I saw of it originally. And he was talking about yoga in a much broader sense than just stretching, really in terms of like life's purpose, happiness, relationship to money, all of life. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm interested in. He's got an app called Sanctuary, deep lineage in various traditional kinds of yoga. So Rod, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mark. Good to be with you.
How did you get interested in the body? Let's hear a bit about your life story.
You know, I think it's a good question. I believe that I was always a seeker, frankly. And my two favorite subjects in high school were psychotherapy and ceramics. But psychotherapy was the one that really got me. So I went to study, and I found, like, I got to college and I was in a room with 400 other people learning, Psych 101, and I couldn't have been more bored, frankly. And then I drifted towards philosophy, thinking that I could answer deeper questions that way. I left college in my junior year, and within 4 or 5 months, someone recommended I do yoga. And I felt like in the first of all, I read the introduction to the book was Light on Yoga. I felt like I was remembering something rather than learning something. And then the very first time I did it, I actually felt that I had touched philosophy in that hour more deeply than I had in all my years of studying philosophy and psychology. So it really was the body. The body began to give me, or was a bridge to something beyond the body that I had been looking for, I think, my whole life. And in short, I did it passionately on my own out of this book for the next 9 months. And then I moved back to Los Angeles. I experienced Kundalini yoga, first time with a teacher, relaying yoga. I found it, again, more of the same, enrichment and connection and something deeply revealing about more the mystery of who I was and what I was, giving me some clarity about that. And then I wound up meeting a teacher who was part of a lineage, a tradition. And, I think in the context of what we're talking about, I remember meeting with him one-on-one after I'd been studying with him for about 4 months. And this was a meeting about getting a prescribed or specific meditation practice and guidance in that sense. But I remember him looking me in the eye and sensing that I was looking into a mirror that in which I had never seen myself. In other words, I actually felt like he was penetrating who I was. I kind of wanted to hide, frankly. And I began to practice meditation on a regular basis at that point. I was about 22 years old. And what the asana did to my philosophy, kind of feeling like it was embodied and giving me that connection to the seeking I was doing philosophy, meditation got right to the heart of what I realized the asana was giving me. And that became part of my personal practice, really daily practice for the next 17, 18 years. And then I met another teacher, that my teacher passed away. And then I met another teacher who was also part of an ancient lineage. And he continues to be my teacher today. And meditation continues to be the center of my life, but I still continue to do and teach yoga. And I'm using the word loosely so that we can kind of, if you want to, we can drill down into what yoga is, what it isn't. And so there's still a physical component to it, but it has maybe 3 main tiers. One is what you spoke to, Mark, is this idea of what are you going to do with the rest of your life when you're not on a mat? And the second would be touching soul or touching spirit. So one is about life. The other is what is beyond this life. And the third is kind of managing and shaping prana or energy through yoga practice. A distant fourth place is my hamstrings. Mm-hmm. In other words, what my body's doing. Because if I'm living a fulfilled life, energetically, I'm as enlivened as I can possibly be, and I'm touching something that is not of this world, then really I'm satisfying what I see as the core tenets of what yoga practice really is. And in the meantime, we can use our body to help us get there. It's just, it's a more of a means than an ends.
we find ourselves in this wonderful situation today where yoga's more widespread than ever before. More people are practicing than ever before. And there's yoga places on every street corner almost. Every major city in the world has its yoga centers of various flavors and kinds now. And a lot of what you've talked about maybe wouldn't even be recognized in a good proportion of those studios.
Absolutely.
So this is kind of an interesting situation we find ourselves, which is on the one hand wonderful. Like, wow, I couldn't have imagined this as a child, let alone when you were a kid, right? Like, I'm 40. So when I was a kid, this was unimaginable, let alone back in the 50s or 60s, whatever. Like, something huge has happened, but there's also this very strange thing that's happened simultaneously. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was there. I am now 62. So I mentioned starting to teach when I was 23. In those days, the idea that you could make a living as a yoga teacher was an absurd notion. I mean, talk about a bad career choice. My father, who expected me to be an attorney or a doctor or something of consequence, heard that I was taking yoga seriously to actually make a living from it, was not a happy man. Luckily, before he died, that changed, and he saw that that there was some substance in it. But in essence, I saw that shift happening, and that was about 20 years ago. And what I would tell you is that, look, in part, what made yoga become popular was that we extracted the most understandable and even quantifiable aspect of it.
You can grab the body, it's tangible, you can see it.
How far am I from my knee when I do a forward bend? Oh, in 6 months, I'm closer to my knee. Oh, then I'm succeeding. And we took out the philosophy. Now, I would argue that yoga without philosophy is called exercise. And because really what yoga is the embodiment of a specific philosophy.
Yeah.
A specific kind of experience. And without knowing what the philosophy is, or ultimately looking to embody that, then you really just have fitness. And let's also be very honest about it. It's not even a great approach to fitness.
No, there's better ways to be strong and flexible. And
right
I had this conversation with Simon Borg-Olivier recently, who was on, and basically said, we need to have the conversation about what yoga isn't. So there's this very accepting, beautiful thing, no judgment, and acceptance is a big part of yoga culture, philosophy, and that can kind of turn into this near enemy of just saying, well, everything's yoga. It's like, well, as you say, surely some things are exercise, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's something different, and it's okay that it's different, but let's name it as different.
Yeah, you couldn't be more right. You couldn't be more right about that. So what I would say is it created an ease for people to relate to it. People got to start bending and moving, and then no big deal. You put music on, and I'm now moving in rhythm, and it's nonstop, and we began to really meet people. And I think we began to really meet people at their current levels of imbalance. And what I mean by that, there's this principle within Sankhya philosophy, which is the core tenet, the core of yoga philosophy, and Ayurveda, that tells us that we feel most comfortable sustaining or actually increasing our current level of imbalance. That's where we feel comfortable.
Uh-huh.
And what doesn't feel comfortable and yet is beneficial is very often shifting or creating a change. So if I'm kind of hyper or just easily distracted, and I give you distracting stimuli, whether it's entertainment or, by the way, a yoga class, it'll actually meet you where you are. And so there's a certain level of satisfaction, but there's not a level of growth.
Yeah. And people feel comfortable with unpleasant things that they've gotten used to, with trauma, and also,
right,
as you say, the manic speed of modern life will still feel more. People will feel deeply uncomfortable just going to a peaceful, relaxed location, sitting somewhere, because it's just not what their system is. Yeah. The system's aesthetic that way, right?
There's also kind of a reckoning that I had to do some decades ago, which is I realized that I had now been teaching for 25 years. And I looked around at many of my peers, and then some people that I had trained or they had trained. And Mark, frankly, there's a dearth, there's a lack of spiritual inquisitiveness on the part of most human beings, let alone yoga practitioners. And that was stunning to me. That was a kind of awakening where I realized, look, deep down, we all want what we want, but we don't necessarily seek deeply what we need. Mm-hmm. And I think modern life, you speak to it, it's like we'd rather kind of buy into the easy distraction than look at the deep questions that we really want and need to answer in order for us to be happy. And I think it's that convenience, a lack of also this kind of deep spiritual hunger or seeking on the part of many practitioners and many of their teachers, frankly, that then has created this kind of lackadaisical attitude about what yoga is. Well, if I just grab that part of yoga that doesn't ask me to look deeper.
Yeah.
Then that's part of its ubiquitousness.
I don't mind me jumping in again, but let's drill into that a little bit. Like, what is this spiritual hunger or this deepening? Like, is it something that just, hey, a lot of people, the average rice farmer in India probably didn't have it 2,000 years ago, right? Like, is it something which is just not in most people? Is it something that has to be cultivated? Is it something that our modern conditions maybe are a little toxic to? It's because there's so much available. Like that guy in India 2,000 years ago didn't have the same iPhones and the distractions and all the potential things that can pull. Like after we get done with this interview tonight, I've got a million things that could be shiny, happy, put
right
away. And if I was just sitting in a mud hut somewhere, I might not have all that. So what do you think?
I would argue that actually that longing to know yourself, and I'm going to use that language, but I have to capitalize the S. To know yourself, to know the soul, or to know the source that's brought you into the world. I would argue that that's actually the deepest and most enduring longing of all longings. Now, do we know it? Do we recognize it? And do we actually honor it to the extent that we do stuff to accomplish it? That is what's exceptional. The fact is that because we don't know ourselves, and because we don't have this awareness of our source, we don't know anything permanent. The human condition is such that our five senses won't allow us to perceive what is enduring and perceive what is permanent. Therefore, because everywhere we turn, we're dealing with impermanence, fear accompanies us at every step in our life. It's only when you begin and when you ideally deepen the experience of what is beyond this world, what is enduring, that we can begin to make a dent in this human condition of fear being persistent. And really it's this fear of loss or fear of death, fear of void, fear of the annihilation, that is the source of all of our other fears. This is what the yoga tradition teaches. Mm-hmm. So I would say every human being wants to live with less fear. They may do a lot of stuff to avoid recognizing how much fear they have, but since we all want to avoid the experience of fear, it tells us that deep down, we really want to know what's permanent. So, but it's interesting you bring up the ancient cultures. Now, if you're starving to death, this conversation is beside the point. This is
a hierarchy thing going on there. Yeah.
On the other hand, many ancient cultures, including India, which, we could have a separate conversation about in terms of how well it embodies some of these very lofty principles it introduced to the world. Not so great, frankly, as a culture or society. But you do see it, prior to that, like 3,000 or 4,000 years ago in India, this awareness or this alliance with or alignment to that which was enduring was part of their culture. And this was, in fact, a way, and we see it throughout the world, and never mind Orthodox religion, but this actual imbuing one's life, inculcating oneself with a devotion or an awareness to what lies beyond this world was a key piece of bringing happiness and fulfillment, you could say.
Yeah. And I still see that. I still see that in India and Bali and various places today.
Yeah.
There's something in the culture which is saying, what the key questions are in some way mattering. They're infused, maybe it be ritualistically or religiously. And, I guess sometimes I get cynical when I look at the modern yoga scene, but other days when I'm sometimes just in a better mood, what I see is that searching with the 20-year-old going to Bali to do her first 200-hour teacher training, or the office worker coming out of work and he's stressed and he's, it's 8 o'clock at night and he goes past the hot yoga studio and he sees someone coming out that looks radiant and he goes, oh, maybe I should give that a try. I've heard that yoga's good for you, the office worker in London. And I go, there is a seek. It's not. Now, there is, on the one hand, there is this travesty of sort of materialistic takeover of that, which is worth fighting and is worth saying something about. But then on the other hand, underneath that, there is this longing, isn't there, for this sort of human spiritual seeking that you can't repress, no matter how much advertising there is or whatever else is out there.
I think that's the case. I do think, though, the cynical part of me says that, look, if you go to a yoga class and you're really trying to solve, whether you know it or not, but you're trying to address this existential longing or angst even, and you get to a class that is, I'll paraphrase and call it more superficial, and it's more body oriented. It doesn't have meditation, doesn't have life, doesn't have this prana or energy thing component I mentioned in the beginning. And you do it for a year or 2 years, and you've gotten more flexible, you got a little more healthy, but you don't actually have a sea change in terms of how you see the world. It creates a cynicism toward yoga, and it says,
yes,
that ain't going to work.
And this is where I can get furious, Rod. This is the part of me which is sort of like Jesus turning over the tables part of me, where I go, okay, it's one thing to say I want to watch TV and drink beer and good luck to you, but it's another thing to ruin, to put people off, to lie to people, to take people's genuine urge for seeking, subvert that into something which either becomes boring or becomes like a second Matrix. It just comes back into the consumerist kind of body, and then they're either cynical, as you say, or another one, I think, self-deluded. Like I was speaking to a young lady who's very clearly doing her yoga to look physically attractive, but if you asked her about that, because that's all her practice was directed at, that was her action, whatever she said her motivation was. But when I asked her about that, she's like, no, it has this other lofty motivation.
Mm-hmm.
But that it didn't match with what she was actually doing. But I don't believe she was lying to me. I believe she was lying to herself.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a real P.
Well, and yoga becomes what we make of it. And that's really what we're seeing in your concern and that you've expressed is really shaped by all of these people teaching it. There's a statistic, and I believe it's true. I don't think I'm making this up. There's more yoga teachers in California than there are in India.
Wow.
All right. So, and, frankly, look, let's just be frank. Let's just put it on the table for all your listeners. The average skill of most yoga teachers is abysmal. They're not actually teachers. They're instructors. They're almost more conductors. And what they've done is they've taken enough classes and maybe done a teacher training or two, whereby they've learned a kind of choreography, a sequence of postures that they call out in one way or another, and the class follows. Meanwhile, there's more injuries than ever in yoga classes. Chiropractors and physical therapists are actually making a living, in part thanks to the lack of skill on most yoga teachers. Teachers aren't teaching, they're conducting classes. And as a result, since it doesn't require a high skill set, here's what goes on. You don't have to make a living as a yoga teacher. And I'm not saying making a living as a yoga teacher is easy by any stretch, but it's possible. As a result of you can make a living because of the larger cultures, underestimation of what yoga's potential is. Their lack of understanding of the potential of yoga to do where we started this conversation, which is truly change your life, truly change the way you see yourself, capital S, and profoundly change your energy so that you're showing up in a totally different way. Because most people don't assume that. Their expectations for yoga is so low that you could go study with almost anyone who's had a minimal of training and go, oh, I'm doing yoga, without really knowing that you're being shortchanged about what its potential is all about.
Let's give an analogy for this, Rod, because I think this is great, but an analogy would really bring it out. Like, what would be an analogy? Like people that have learned the basic form of writing. So what you've got is a lot of people who have been trained to take a pen and scribble on a piece of paper. And they're training everybody else to scribble on a piece of paper. And if you go there, it looks like a whole bunch of people writing. But actually all they're doing is scribbling lines. There's no actual language being written. They're not writing a book. They're not writing a poem. So the difference between someone writing a poem and someone scribbling lines on a piece of paper, if you weren't yet fluent in that language, would look the same. And it's very easy to copy someone scribbling lines on a piece of paper, but it's very hard to teach how to write a poem.
Yeah, there may be another one that maybe is even simpler, and that is, our diet, our food. If the pure objective of eating was to fill your stomach, then you could put anything in there, right? The objective of food is actually be nurtured and nourished by what you're eating. You can feel full after any meal, practically, eating anything. But then when you start getting irritable or your digestion, elimination start to be compromised, and you don't understand that it's actually how you're eating, because food should actually make us feel vitalized and it should be easy to digest. And so the confusion is that if I don't know that eating should make me feel a certain way, I continue to eat, but I feel like crap. I don't really make the association that food has the potential to make me feel really good and have a lot of vital energy. And that's what I would say about yoga, is it's supposed to be more nurturing and nourishing than a lot of people's understanding of what it is. And so as a result, it's easy to hire out or go to a class of someone who has a minimal of understanding and is more of a conductor than a teacher. And, it's something that in my time I've tried to, and I think I've been somewhat successful, to create a resource for teachers, for actual teachers, to help individuals understand what are the best practices for them, teachers to create an array of different practices for different positive outcomes. So, we won't change the whole scene by the time it's done. There have been two really significant articles in the New York Times over the last few years about the yoga scene. One came out about, is yoga good for your body? And it was by this, and I've forgotten his, Steve Broad, I think his name was. He's a science writer for the New York Times. And he talked about his injury that he got in yoga and how inept, and the adjustments being somewhat dangerous, and his knowledge of science saying this is not scientific at all. Well, welcome to the yoga world. People were aghast that the science editor for the New York Times would, put yoga in this kind of context. And I'm thinking, thank God he did. So it's like a little bit more of buyer beware.
Yeah.
And then just recently, there was an article about adjustments, inappropriate adjustments, and sexual exploits in class, and sexual abuse, and even in class by some really well-known teachers. Again, buyer beware. Just because you get into a yoga class doesn't mean the person knows anything about your body.
Yeah.
Just because you come with a bad back doesn't mean yoga is going to make it better. And just because you're getting adjusted by someone in class doesn't mean that they don't have a personal agenda that lacks integrity. So all of these things are actually positive, I think, to make people more circumspect about what yoga isn't and what it shouldn't be doing, and ultimately, hopefully, generate a conversation about what it is.
Mm-hmm. So let's be concrete then here. It's easy for us to be critics. It's easy to, a lot of the senior yoga teachers I have on having this same conversation. They're almost embarrassed to call themselves yoga teachers. Some of them have told me, because the standard of what they'd be associated with.
Yeah.
What do you add in? So someone comes to you, they say, right, I've heard you great. I want to do training with you. I've done my 200. I know my basic asana. They can do their downwards dog and their warrior two. What are the things you'd be really adding into them, enriching their class with?
Well, I made the case that the center of my practice is meditation. It's the center of my life. It's the center. It's really the center of my practice. It's the center of my teaching. So honestly, it would be to ensure that everyone caught a glimpse, or was able to enter a rhythm of silence, mental stillness. Yoga actually is defined as the stilling of the mind. And what the beauty of yoga and why yoga works, in essence, is because to find peace, to find and access greater peace and well-being, we don't actually have to add anything. What we need to do is reduce our obstacles from seeing ourselves clearly. We have to create a peaceful flow of mind, which is innate in the mind. We all came in joyous. We all came in with a peaceful flow of mind. And what yoga does, so in short, let me make sure I'm answering your question. And that is that no matter what the class is, whether it's an energizing class or a calming class or an inspiring class, and all of these things can be orchestrated by the way you sequence the particular practices you sequence. And understanding, for example, specifically, giving people an experience of do the normal class. It feels more or less like most yoga classes might, but at the end of it, there'll be a peace of mind. There'll be a resting in oneself. The word for soul in the yogic tradition is purusha. And the etymology of that word is really quite fascinating. It's puru means city or vehicle or place or body, and sha means that which is resting. So think of Purusha as being, in a way, not just describing the soul, but ultimately the most profound way to live. What I mean by that is that you are at rest in your own body. You're at rest in your own home. You're at rest in your car. You're at rest in the tube. So the idea here is yoga should be giving us a glimpse, should be making us feel more at home in ourselves. And that's why the fitness part of it, as you said, it's a bonus, but it's so far from the goal. So in essence, they would come to class and they would get a glimpse. And it doesn't have to be of that, what I've just talked about. It doesn't have to be cloaked in Sanskrit. It doesn't have to be cloaked in abstract, esoteric ideas. It really is in the skill of sequencing a class, what poses you use, what poses you don't use, that there's a coherence that points and moves a body, mind, and energy in a specific direction that at a minimum gives someone a greater sense of themselves, a greater sense of ease. And all that can be done in the same allotment of time or even less, because I think some of the principles that I learned from my teachers actually make yoga more efficient. You don't have to do 54 push-ups to get to this soul stuff that I'm talking about. So it's very pragmatic. I hope that what I'm portraying it doesn't mean you have to like suddenly wear beads and exotic clothing or suddenly put a bindi on your forehead. Like I
was actually quite surprised by when I looked into your lineage, because I'd heard a TED talk from you. I had done a couple of online classes, read a couple of, I thought that's really down to earth, scientific guy. And then I looked into your lineage and it was, Indian names and things. I was shocked because there was such a sort of down to earth, accessible quality to what you're doing there. You didn't have any of the, listeners can't see, but he's not, he's wearing a tracksuit. He's not wearing orange robes. I'm terribly sorry if that disappoints some people. And I was really pleasantly surprised to say, you had that lineage, but you weren't too, because people get attached to the form, don't they? They get attached to the colors.
The robes can make can give you a lot of students. It's interesting you say that. In a way, I guess I am. I appreciate it. For me, it was actually a source of confusion. And now I'm speaking very personally, because I was struck. Two things. I'll just comment on that. One is that the first thing was that meeting with my teacher the very first time I mentioned when I was going to get my own personal practice. He didn't ask me about my practice. He asked me about my life. His questions were, how are you? Tell me about your life. Tell me about your relationships. Tell me about, and it was from there that he actually constructed my practice. In other words, we'll call it the barometer or the reflection or way of interpreting whether or not your practice was what you were practicing is successful, is right, is it should affect the quality of your life. That was just drummed into me the very beginning. And then later, maybe when I started taking myself seriously as a yoga teacher, still early on, first 2-3 years, I remember my teacher, who was steeped in traditional knowledge, studied with some of the most significant yoga luminaries of the previous century, spent much time in India, living in India. He looked at me and he said, don't dress like a yoga teacher. No one should know that you teach yoga unless they hear yoga coming out of your mouth. And it was about avoiding all of these trappings and the would-be kind of aura of a yoga teacher and be a human being. So between those two things, I really, in a way, I struggled to personally in my first decade and a half, which was, I'm so Western, and yet it seems as though I'm being asked to carry a tradition, carry ancient teachings to the West. And the fact that I don't dress the part is actually confusing to people. But this is where I felt like, this is authentic. This is my authentic expression of those things. Yeah.
Quick break to tell you about our program. So as well as the podcast, we have various kinds of online training. So we have the Embodied Yoga Principles online training, as well as in-person training. Embodied Yoga Principles for yogis who want to get yoga off the mat, specialize in the psychology of yoga, unique postures. It's a 5-day training. We have one in Brighton, one in Berlin, and one in Austin, Texas. So if you go to Embodied Yoga Principles, you can find them. Also the online version of the training for people who can't make those dates. Excellent courses. The Embodied Yoga Principles training for the yogis. For the coaches and facilitators, we have the Embodied Facilitator Course. This is our flagship course. We offer it in Moscow, also in the UK. A 9-month adventure, real deep dive into embodiment. It's the biggest embodiment program I do. It could be like movement people who want to work in business more. We have people like dancers and martial arts teachers come to learn more about working in mainstream settings, but also for coaches and trainers who want something really well structured and want to work on themselves, they want to learn practical tools, learn how to work with the body in facilitation. If you can't make EFC, and it is a big ask, there's an online course we run called the Foundations of Embodiment Certification. So if you go to Embodied Facilitator, you'll find the in-person, and then FEC, F-E-C, F for Freddy, E-C for Charlie, FEC, you'll come out with the Foundations of Embodiment Certification, and also do one-day events all around the world. So I'm just about to do a tour to Slovenia, Berlin, Copenhagen, Brussels, Amsterdam, and Brighton. The Brighton one is £10, which is like $15. So if you're coming from abroad, that could make that affordable. The Brighton one's always like a really big fun one, so that's coming up. Again, go to the Embodied Facilitator course to see all of these events. And we have a little online evening as well. If people just want a taster, again, that's £10. That's a 3-hour thing coming up as well. Embodiedfacilitator.com, embodiedfacilitator.com, and you'll find all those events, or Embodied Yoga Principles for the yoga ones. Okay, so that's the stuff that I sell. Oh, and the book, the Embodiment book. If you want to get my book and learn about embodiment through reading, you can also get the Embodiment book available at Amazon and no good bookstores. So there we go. Excuse the interruption, and back to the episode.
Yeah. Sometimes I imagine if yoga came from the Aztecs or the ancient Greeks, and I kind of have, imagine like how silly would it be if we were dressing in togas, or Aztec with feathers, kind of Aztec kind of crazy gear, or do you know what I mean? Like I kind of like, that's no more silly, it's no more foreign than India. It's just is it just something we've got a bit used to,
It's a good point. Good point. By the way, it's easier to dress the part than to live it.
Okay. Yeah. What does that mean to you then, living the part of yoga? What does that mean, like living yoga for you? Like
well, that
about the sort of yamas, like what does that look like to you?
It's really the subject matter of my book, of the 4 desires. And the idea here is, and I think it's worth just noting for the people who might not be familiar with it, there's 2 seminal, like the core teachings of yoga are in 2 different texts. One is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and he really is very process driven about what I spoke about earlier, about touching the soul, and etc. The other one's the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita is intriguing because it doesn't actually take place in a yoga room. It's not in a cave. It's not in some esoteric environment. It's actually on a battlefield. The actual scene and the teaching is on a battlefield, and moreover, it's specifically about an individual, a seeker, if you will, who's confronting life and death decision about whether to go left or right, whether to go into battle or not. And because he's pious, he actually leans toward not going into battle. So that whole instruction is so telling, because what it suggests, and this is the answer to your question, it's about conscience. What that teaching is about is yoga is about the awakening of conscience, and not cultural conscience, not what I've been told is good and bad, but really deep in my heart, there's an inner teacher, an inner guidance that is always telling me right from wrong. And moreover, there are times in my life where the external view of things might be, it's yamas and niyamas or the 10 commandments. There are times where they're in conflict with each other. And so it's actually the inner conscience that is the highest teacher or guide, the inner teacher. And how do you become clear about what that is telling you to do moment to moment. It's one, contacting that conscience, which can only be done with a calm and clear and tranquil mind, is yoga. And number two, living courageously from that conscience is yoga. So if you ask me, what does that mean to live your yoga? I would tell you it's those two things. It's touching conscience and then living your life based on conscience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we give a lot of lip service to the idea of live your purpose, but that's consistent with the same idea. Yep. And then moment to moment, we're faced with challenging decisions. I have 4 children. Not all of them are children anymore. And we're faced with difficult decisions all the time, and conflicted choices. It's really the idea that you hold true to this idea. It's the principle of holding true to the idea that something inside of you is an ever-present fountainhead of knowledge and guidance, calming your mind enough, and this is why I practice yoga daily, calming your mind enough to hear it, and then stepping into the courage to live it. And that's what I would say is yoga. And at that point, it produces a kind of freedom. If you're serving your purpose, if you're serving this conscience, it provides you with not just a kind of fulfillment, but ultimately a kind of freedom that living without it simply doesn't. And so I would tell you that's what the yoga is all about.
So being able to calm your body mind to a degree where you can tune into that voice.
That's right.
You can tune into that radar that says, hey, this is more your purpose and this isn't. Hey, maybe you shouldn't be speaking to that person that way. Hey, maybe now's the time to walk away before this argument gets heated.
All of the above.
Yeah.
You know, the one of the things when I'm teaching the 4 desires, so the course that book is based on, one of the things I say in the opening conversation is there's a question that all human beings ask themselves more than any other question. A singular question that in the course of your life you will ask more than 1,000,000 times. And the question is, what's next?
That's the question at the heart of all of the philosophy of ethics, right? You think like values is just like, oh, should I not kill this or should I be vegetarian? But it's literally every decision you have to make, right?
How will I sit? How will I stand? Will I take notes? Will I hear this all the way through? Or while someone is hearing our conversation, are they simultaneously buying a sweater?
Right.
You know, and this is just background filler, or is this something that they're really listening to?
Let's bring that in then. Let's bring them in. So people are listening and maybe they're, on the subway in New York or walking through Hyde Park in London or, crossing the road in Berlin or whatever. Like, what does this philosophy you're talking about look like to the person who's listening to this podcast while walking along the street in wherever?
Well, I would again tell you, and that's the message of this book is the Gita, is you have to take pause. Now, you have to take pause because your senses are such, we've trained ourselves and our senses are distracting enough that we get so pulled by what's happening around us, outside of us. And then there's that inner perception of our emotions and our feelings. All of that they're all obstacles to hearing this resource of inner guidance and conscience. So they can walk in the subway. I mean, I know some people, they can walk in the park, or they can be on the subway, but some people will actually close their eyes, maybe listening to my app or something, and they will take pause. And it's amazing how just a few minutes get you back to a sense of authenticity that no amount of work in the world will provide you with. So that's the key thing. When I'm sitting and life it's a powerful metaphor. Life is a battlefield. Have we ever felt like embattled by choices and decisions and conflict and incomplete things that we need to complete and responsibilities? Of course, we all do and all have. Now the question is, how do I rise above the conflict, see the best way forward? And that is really taking pause. So I would say we have to devote that to ourselves. And that's again, I don't want to loop back and, as you said, just continue to criticize the yoga scene. But, a lot of modern yoga classes are the opposite, where we're actually doing the opposite of pausing.
Yeah.
It actually becomes another form of stimulation.
Right. I just spent 4 days doing Feldenkrais method. And in Feldenkrais, you have a 1 minute lie down every 10 minutes. So they'll have 9 shavasana in an hour-long session. And I'm like, wow, I like this because my nervous system's integrated. Because even what I realized doing this slow, careful movement practice, is it even just doing a little thing like a forward bend? It's kind of exciting on some level. It's stimulating, like a side stretch or whatever. And just to take those pauses to let it settle is super valuable.
Well, what's intriguing, I think, and what I think you're speaking to, is that when you do those things and your breath is even slightly coherent, and you're intentionally affecting the way you breathe, because that's such a powerful mechanism to affect the way you feel and the way your body responds to anything in a given moment, that there's almost nothing you can't do, including Feldenkrais, which, again, for those listening who are not familiar with it, it's rather subtle. And that's almost its purpose. Mm-hmm. And yet the impacts are not insignificant at all. The impacts can be really huge. I understand it was being developed for different repetitive motion injuries, and indeed the effects are significant. So what's intriguing about more deliberate approach to movement combined with intentional breathing is everything creates a shift. And it's attuning to those shifts that does two things. One, it heightens the value, it heightens the effect of the shift. So when I'm aware that I've shifted, it actually builds the impact of the shift. But the other thing it does is it connects me to the one who's observing the shifts.
Okay.
And the observer of the shifts is actually the real you.
So rather than being caught in it, there's that bit of space where, as you say, you step out of the battlefield and go, well, hang on, let's look at what's the best action next. And not only does it give you a better action, but it's strengthening that ability to identify with the witness there rather than being caught in the action.
And you, Mark, seem to like practical examples. So for example, the person walking in the park who might be listening to podcasts and now has gone off and they got a new text notification. And the text notification produces a reaction. They don't actually perceive it. They just kind of react to what's come in. Now, if you pause just enough, you don't even have to do this, of course, with your eyes closed, but just begin to sense if it's a text that produced even a little bit of stress, as per what we were just speaking about, you take a moment, you go, okay, so where's the stress in my body right now?
Okay, so maybe you notice your belly's tight, your breath's holding, whatever's going on.
Exactly. Constriction in the throat, your breath rhythm has changed. And then the one who's aware of those changes, the more one steps into the observer of those changes, the more we see those changes as temporary and fluctuating. Thus, the less we are drawn into and subsumed by by that stressful text.
It's not us. It's just a thing that's gone on. And it's like, okay, one of 100 dishes being served to our consciousness that day. This one's called being angry or scared. Okay. Yeah. And right on. So that strikes me as the most important part of physical yoga. Is not, like I'm flexible enough to tie my shoes. My hamstrings are long enough. It's fine. Unless you have a particular injury or something that needs healing, I'm good. I don't have sick days. My health's good. And it strikes me that transfer, though, into life is remarkably badly done, not just by yoga, by martial arts, by any physical practice. That I've seen yogis do an hour-long class, go to their phones after the class. First thing you do after each shavasana, obviously, is you turn your phone on. That's traditional now. And immediately go into a fight response and not notice it. Like I've literally, because I've been sitting on my mat, I've been watching them put their mat away. I'm just taking a minute longer to do mine, and I see them turn the phone, and I start texting, and I go, "Wow, that hasn't even lasted 10 seconds. You're literally still in the same room, or changing room." So how do we increase that? Because that seems the point. Like the example of the text or the. I had a little altercation with someone today, where a little verbal argument. At a certain point, I just walked away. I felt my body, realized I was not in a good state. I said, you know what, let's talk about this later. And I just went and laid down and then came back to talk to them a bit later. And if I'd have done that 10 seconds earlier, it would have been even better. And 10 seconds later might have been the end of that relationship, actually. There's a window of 20 seconds that I had, and I was not where I'd like to be ideally, but still better than I could have been and better than I think the sort of untrained person would be. How do we increase that, noticing that, coming back to the breath when in life, because it just seems like they're so badly done?
Wow. The first thing is it's training, frankly. There's an element of training. If we haven't grown accustomed to doing it on a consistent basis, then trying to do it when we're in the midst of stress is all but a lost cause. In other words, we have to begin to develop the muscle without just trying to remedy a quick fix So part of it, as I said, is consistency. And one of the ways, the word for practice in the yoga tradition is abhyasa. Abhyasa means the consistent effort to be there. And the there is a calm, tranquil flow of mind. The consistent effort to be there. So that means we do it consistently. You do it for a long time, relatively uninterruptedly, preferably every day. And you do it with a certain amount of respect or love. Okay, that's the definition of practice. Then secondly, I would ask, and this is something that I think you make a very good point. If we're just flexible, but as reactive as everybody else, we're more flexible because we do asanas, but we're as reactive as everybody else. I would argue that we're not actually yoga practitioners.
Right. We're gymnasts.
Yeah, we're flexible, right? Yeah. Cirque du Soleil, the Cirque du Soleil folks never became gurus, and none of them were ever renowned for being spiritual leaders. So leg behind your head's not going to make you more spiritual. But the point is that what we're actually describing, and if I were to answer your question directly, I would say become aware of the transitions. What we do is we transition moment to moment based on external stimuli. So as you said, one text makes us happy, one text makes us afraid, one text stresses us out, someone honks at us or cuts us off or is inconsiderate or doesn't acknowledge us in the way we're looking for. Moment to moment to moment, another reaction. And we're now almost, the days of daydreaming are all but gone, where we just have a passive time to look up at the ceiling and take 10, 15 minutes to figure out. It's called autobiographical narrative, where psychologists describe this, that when we get bored, what starts to happen is, in short order, I think it's something within 15 minutes or so. And so that means you got to withstand about more than 10 minutes of boredom. But within 10 to 12 minutes, what starts to happen is you now start to process, oh, well, I'm bored. Where have I been? Where am I going? What's important to me? What mistakes have I made? Stuff like that. That doesn't happen anymore. So we're transitioning without any thought about who's not transitioning. Back to my original point of within us, there's someone who's always at rest. Now, if I just keep reacting to life, I lose sight of the part of me that's at peace. I lose sight of the part of me that's at rest. And so, honestly, there are three main transitions between waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And then, of course, sleeping to waking. I don't actually have any sense of who I am in these massive transitions. So think about this. Think about the waking to sleeping transition. Waking, you're this bag of concern, this sack of obligations and worries and things that you love and are attracted to. And now you transition into sleep. And by the way, if you don't let go of those things, you don't transition, right? If you still hold on to everything all your concerns, you don't transition to sleep. Now we go to sleep and we basically disappear. We're in this kind of odd, indescribable void, but we don't even know we're in the void. The yoga tradition would actually argue that's closer to who you are, which is this unified version of reality. Now you transition into dreaming, which is just a recall of your memories plus your imagination. And then you go back to sleep, and finally you wake up again. And there is no sense of who has stayed the same in all of this. And what I guess I'm pointing to is asking, in answering your question, is to say, become aware of the one who doesn't transition, the one who sees the text coming in, the one who reacts to your kids not listening to you, the one whom deals with the political situation, and you see this thing or the opposite version of it either make you happy or make you very anxious. If there's no one that stays the same in all those transitions, you've lost the meaning of life. You've actually lost the thread of peace and healing. And that again speaks exactly to the yoga tradition, which is become aware who is experiencing all these transitions.
Great. Back to strengthening the witness. I like it. And I'm aware of fairly close to time here. And of the the 4 desires, which ones have we covered? I kind of feel like that could be an itch for listeners they might just want to scratch. So what are the 4 desires? Let's name those before we start to wrap up.
Yeah. Let me just add one quick thing, Mark, and just say that, part of my teaching over the last 10 years, 12 years has really turned to the teaching of yoga nidra. And that actually is probably the most accessible practice for most people to begin to gain or touch that part of themselves that I've been addressing throughout much of our conversation, which is the part that's not changing, part that is always at rest. And yoga nidra is mistakenly considered to be a form of relaxation. It's actually not. It looks like relaxation. You're lying on your back, you're doing nothing, but you're touching it. And I would say in this age of so much overstimulation, that probably yoga nidra is a more viable resource than even meditation is to get a sense of that awareness that we touched upon as being critical to being at peace and happy. So just a little plug for yoga nidra. The answer to the question, though, about the 4 desires are, so these are called purusharthas, and they mean for the purpose of the soul. Purusha, we've already defined that actually in the call. And artha meaning in this context, for the purpose of. So this is what it's referring to is 4 innate aims or desires that they're as much a part of you as your next breath, which is that the soul actually carries out its mission in life through the pull, if you will, of these 4 essential aims. The first one we have spoken about, it's called dharma, and it's all about purpose, living with purpose. In short, it means becoming who you were meant to be. But there's a larger context to it because there's also a kind of collective dharma, which is, we see it in nature, which means there's an intelligence that holds the web of life together. So not only is this becoming who I'm meant to be, but it's to do it in a context that's in harmony with everything else that's unfolding. The seasons, the time of life, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this larger intelligence of which we are all a part. And the extent to which I play my individual part in supporting the greater whole, I'm living my dharma, as it were. I.e., I found my purpose, but we shouldn't confuse it with profession. Okay, so it's how do I be the best version of me that supports the greater whole? My profession may actually change halfway through my life.
Right.
Or,
Got it. A bit deeper than that, yeah.
Yeah. Second one, then, we've also spoken about, which is moksha, which is, and really it's often described as the last one, which is essentially means liberation or freedom. And I spoke to that, and it means to be liberated from fear, to be liberated from the obligations and the burdens that you carry that make life less than joyous. And that really is the seed of religion and spirituality and prayer and meditation. Throughout humankind, they're seeking out the fulfillment of this desire for freedom. The next one I would describe would be artha, which is having the wherewithal, having the physical means to accomplish your purpose. So that's money, health, some level of financial security, or home, an environment where you can essentially experience a certain level of security so that you can then operate with enough freedom to fulfill your purpose. So that's money, as I said, and health. And then that final one, which really gets ignored in the yoga world, I can't speak for the rest of humanity very much, but the yoga world is a little less comfortable with this one, and it's the idea of pleasure and sensuality, sexuality, art, music, beauty, friendship, and we could also in that category is the pleasure of accomplishment. Now, if you put those 4 together, you go, purpose, means, pleasure, spirituality, and freedom. In simple terms, that's a full life.
Great. And just on pleasure, I've been with an Italian teacher for the last few days, and compared to British and American teachers, she was so much more pleasure orientated. It's like, enjoy your breath, taste your breath. And I was like, wow, this is a great way into the body. But as you say, it's about the balance, isn't it? Like, I've just thought of a great analogy. It's the A-team. Obviously, I heard you were in the A-team when you were in your youth. And this Hannibal, he's the first one, the life purpose. Murdoch surely is the transcendent, he's above it all.
Right.
BA is like money and physicality. He's got the gold chains, he's got the body. And, Face Man is the pleasure. Like, these are the 4 desires. Like, I never knew it matched up so well.
Well done. Never heard that paradigm around the template of.
But it's the balance, isn't it? Because if you were just about the money, it would be like, hey, what about the spiritual life? But it's also like, you know what, you've got to enjoy life too, and yeah, but be of service to others. It's that balance that's the key thing here, right?
Well, and there's a great scripture that comes actually that's very much the expression of these principles, Manu, and the Manu was a great, really wise king. He was kind of the Hindu version of King Solomon. And he writes that the individual who pursues only one of these is inferior, and two is mediocre. And if you pursue three, you're elevated. But if you pursue all four, that's the superior man or woman, of course. So that's the superior person. So it's not just a balance to suit my well-being. It's also speaking to what really human potential is all about.
Right. Lovely. I love that idea of human potential. And sometimes it seems like it's different stages in life. Like I was more of a spiritual seeker for a while, and I've got students who are really deep Buddhists, and I sometimes look at them and go, you know what would be really great for you, for your spiritual growth, would be to run a business, or to go get laid a lot, or, you know, to really enjoy food. You know, like I kind of, sometimes I feel like that if they've done all the meditating for a while, that maybe there's a diminishing returns, and maybe it's time to spend a couple of years on one of the other things, you know?
You know, I was susceptible to some of those same ideas. I really actually thought when I was really young that I could think my way to a better life. And that's why I was so fortunate to meet with these teachers who I met with, who really used Tantra as the template, which is very much about the body, which really recognizes that, in essence, it's about, there's nothing within the body that's not in the universe. To actually deny your body or deny what's in the body is actually to cut yourself off from living fully in the universe. And so that really turned my thinking around and realized those early bodily experiences where I actually saw what was beyond the body were really vital to not disclude the body. And what you're saying is, and by the way, a lot of really big yoga teachers, famous yoga teachers, would have been helpful if they raised some children too, you know?
Right. Big part of life for a lot of humans.
Yeah.
Okay, let's wrap this up. In terms of finding your stuff, it's Para yoga.com, right? That's the main place people should go.
That's it. They could go to rodstryker.com as well. They could find the app, which currently I keep adding to, and there's some free content on that. There's a subscription option if people want to get there. They could just search on Android apps or Apple apps for Rod Stryker, and they'll find Sanctuary. And
tell us about the app just briefly. I hadn't come across that. What does the app? Is it like yoga classes, or what's on?
It's meditation.
Yep.
Yoga nidra and what I call deep sleep practices. So essentially preparing the nervous system such that we sleep better, longer, and better quality sleep. We fall asleep more easily as well. The meditations, and as well as yoga nidra, there's level 1, 5 minutes, to level 3, 45 minutes. And they're all divided into different categories, 4 categories of heal, peace, empower, and spirit. So the idea was really just to give people, because for me, it's so much about, it's not the theories. We could theorize forever and yet still be miserable. It's the taking pause. It's the beginning to tap into this inner resource. It's regularly finding a peaceful flow of mind. So I really wanted to take advantage of technology and how, our phones are constantly at our side, if not in our hand at any given time, and offer these technologies offer these techniques, these modalities that make such a difference in people's lives. And I also grew up, we didn't talk that much about my background, but there's not one way to meditate. It's like mindfulness has become almost so ubiquitous. It feels like it's blotted out the diverse world of meditation.
That's just one tradition, right? Kind of a Theravada and mindfulness and body and breath, and there's Hindu traditions, all sorts out there. Yeah,
and exactly, the tantric tradition itself. And that's why we could put them in different categories. And I really wanted at different levels so that people could experience the vast potential of meditation, but moreover, even dial into specifically what they needed at any given time. And there's some other features on the app, and it's just really, someone just recently gave us some feedback on it and just said, on the one hand, it feels global and yet incredibly intimate. And main thing was, currently there's over 70 different meditations and yoga nidra practice on it. And we can continue to add every month. So
that's the Sanctuary app. I just downloaded it, so I might be going to sleep with you tonight, Rod. It's a bit of late night meditation.
Well, I guess it was a successful conversation from a good talk and sleeping together.
We've gone a long way for a first date. This has been great. I've really enjoyed it, actually. I like your style, like we have to say. I appreciate it, Rod. Yeah, what do you want to wrap up with? Maybe a message about the body to finish?
There's a teaching in the yoga tradition that suggests that, it's this concept of with a thorn, you can remove a thorn. Or there's another reference of it that you can use the earth to push off the earth. And so what I would say is that what I learned through yoga and what yoga can be is a way to use the body to move beyond the body, to use what is your most accessible dimension of being in this world to tasting what is beyond this world. And that's the beauty of our embodiment. It's also the beauty of the science of these various traditions that allow us to use our body, this most accessible resource, to get a sense of what lies beyond it. And if we can live in the body can thrive, and we can thrive then on the deeper levels by using the body intelligently. And so I'd invite as many people to do that as possible. The way I sign off now most of the time when I close workshops and trainings and things is, in the end, take good care of yourself and remember to be kind. And that's really what it is.
Nice, simple close there. And I always sign off by saying, thanks for joining us today. And I just realized that's got a sort of deeper yoga meaning. So, Rod, thanks for joining us today. Some ways to get more, to give back, and to get more involved now. So the biggest request I have would be to share the podcast with your friends, people that you think would really enjoy it. Email it to them, put it on your social media, tell them about it, old school. Really appreciate that. Equally, if you want to support us financially, you can go to Patreon. That's patreon.com/Embodiment Podcast and give us $1 an episode. And I'd say they're well worth $1. So that's less than £1 if you're in UK-ish. So yeah, please go there. On the embodiedfacilitator.com website is where this is hosted. Most people I think listen to for iTunes. iTunes, we'd certainly appreciate a review. The way iTunes works means that a review means more people will find it. iTunes regards it as more important for searches. So even a couple of sentences review really does help as a little thank you to us. And if you want to go to embodiedfacilitator.com, you can see the actual, links to the sites. There's comments on there. The Facebook group tends to be where people discuss things. So if you go to put in the Embodiment Podcast into Facebook, there's a page which is relatively quiet and a group which does have some discussion on. So I will reply to things personally there. So also on embodiedfacilitator.com website, there's all sorts of freebies there. There's videos, there's free ebooks, there's ebooks you can buy. And of course, there's our newsletter list. If you want to stay in touch and learn about things like the Embodied Facilitator Course and our next Embodied Yoga Principles teacher training, then go to that website and you'll see a little pop-up and you can get the newsletter through there. Okay, so I think they're the main ones. Tell your friends, pay us some money on Patreon, give us a review on iTunes, send us your email if you want to be on the newsletter list, and get involved on the Facebook there. Bit long. Pick whatever you like that works for you. Until next time, welcome home to the body.